viewers, and welcome back to McElroy's Motors. And in today's video, I am going to be answering one question that I get asked all the time being a car guy. And that question is, why do I, being 26 years old, prefer to drive older cars like this 1997 Saturn SL1 as opposed to my grandfather's 2016 Jeep Compass? This is the same for any other older car. I would rather drive cars from the 80s and 90s and 2000s than opposed to a car from today. So, in this video, let's get started on my explanation. I'm going to kick the list off here by talking about nostalgia. I grew up in the late 90s to early 2000s, and if you grew up around that same time, especially here in the United States or Canada, you would say that you probably knew someone who had one of these cars, or indeed you probably had one as your first car, or whatever. But the truth is, I did know somebody back when I was a kid who had one of these as a daily driver. She was my pastor, and hers was a 1999 Saturn SL2. Hers was fully loaded out the wazoo. She had color-coded bumpers, she had a sunroof, she had a cassette player, and of course 15-inch alloy wheels. This car here though is an SL1, so it's got non-color-coded bumpers, no CD or cassette, 14-inch steel wheels with plastic hubcaps, and if I want a sunroof, I could just pretty much forget about it at that point. But the nostalgia of this car remains, and the fact that I can distinguish a Saturn just by a Saturn honking its horn more than any other car on American roads. Bear in mind, this Saturn is 28 years old. It is 2 years older than I am. But I would say, for the record, that simplicity is definitely its biggest benefit. I have been seeing videos all the time on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok, whatever, that Tesla door handles have a habit of freezing. And the reason why they have a habit of freezing is because they have these electronic handles that pop out, and then when you're in the car, they go back into the body to be more aerodynamic. But at the same time, it's such a stupid design and just overall complicates something that shouldn't have been a problem in the first place. But with a Saturn, all you just gotta do, turn the key, and the door opens. And every single time. It's not gonna give you any issues at all. Take that with your phony electric car. The simplicity of this car goes even further than that, because everything under the hood here is exactly where you expect it to be. I used to have a 2012 Chrysler 200, and while that was a decent car, working on it was a disaster, because everything was not exactly where you expected it to be. The battery terminals were underneath the hood, so if you had to jump start it, it wouldn't be a problem. But if you wanted to change the battery itself, let's say the battery goes bad, you had to take off a tire just to access it. But with this car, everything is right where you need it to be. To change the bulbs, all you gotta do is just unscrew them back here, and to replace the entire cluster itself, it only takes about 3 or 4 bolts. The air filter is right here, you got the battery right behind it, and you also have your fuse box, well, one of your fuse boxes right next to that. To change the spark plug wires, can't be easier, you just pull them out and out they come. They're literally just sitting here right in front of me. The AC compressor is right there, washer fluid is right here, you got the coolant or Dexcool is right here, you got your power steering fluid, you got your engine, well, your head is right here, you got your oil filter right there, brake fluid back there, and there's really not much more than that. It is very, very simple, and I wish to God cars these days were as simple and as easy to work on as this 28-year-old Saturn. And like I said, the hood is extremely light. I'm literally holding it with just one finger. Pop in the trunk of my Saturn, and you'll see it's a bit of a mess, but ignore that. As you can see, changing the taillight clusters is also relatively easy. Just takes 2 Allen-headed screws, and that's it. One other benefit of having an older car is you don't get as much technology that makes all these newer cars seemingly like the latest and greatest. No, in this Saturn it's just back to basics motoring. Inside the radio I have no CD or cassette player at all, which to me, unlike any other millennial, I find it quite refreshing. Most millennials will find it lame or outdated. But at the same time, it is so refreshing not having a ginormous touchscreen glaring at me while I'm driving through the night. And overall, it is just so much more easier to understand. And when I bought this car, it didn't even come with an owner's manual. And yet I was able to figure out how to program my radio stations. I was able to figure out how to change the clock, and so on and so forth. It is just simple electronics at its best. And yes, I don't have any rotary climate controls, but they're sliders. It just makes it so much easier, and it feels so much more satisfying to me sliding this temperature lever back and forth. I do not know why, but to me it's just, there's something purely mechanical about it. I don't know if it's just me, but it just feels much more rewarding. I would rather have to deal with the clicking and sounds of these sliders than go through a touchscreen, go through the different menus, and just push. I don't need any of that. And while my first car, which was an Eagle Premier, had a climate control bezel right here on the steering column, and you had to go push, you didn't have to take your eyes off the road just to access it. In fact, it was actually quite convenient. In fact, everything in this car is quite nicely laid out. You got your climate controls down here, you got your radio right above that, you got your rear defroster right here, and like I said, no screens, nothing glaring in my face. It's all very, very simple. Now, call me crazy if you will, but as it stands right now, I can afford a BMW M3, a brand new BMW M3. But honestly, I would rather drive older cars like this because I think they have far more character than anything brand new. Because over time, a car develops quirks. Like, for example, sometimes this car chimes at me if I leave the car and take the ignition key with me, thinking that the ignition is still activated. But other than that, it develops quirks, and you kind of bond with the car a little bit more. And yes, the interior materials on this car they're not great. I will be honest, they are far from great. But all in all, I would rather drive this cheap-feeling plastic buzz box than driving anything brand new, because it is, like I said, not only is it a lot more simple, but also it just adds a whole different level of personality that cars these days just don't have. Another reason why I would rather drive this 28-year-old Saturn SL1 as opposed to my grandfather's 2016 Jeep Compass is the fact that the Saturn is so much cheaper to run. For instance, all the parts for this car are relatively cheap. The spark plug wires that I got a couple weeks ago only cost me 20 bucks, and installing them cost me absolutely nothing at all because the guy was just being so kind. But either way, it is so much cheaper to keep this thing running, mainly because I don't have a car payment, my car insurance is lower, and overall I just don't necessarily care about it. I don't have to worry about dings or dents, mainly because it is dent resistant. And better still, all the parts are necessarily just GM parts, just developed a little bit more differently for the Saturn brand. So all in all, parts are still available, and everything is still readily accessible. And what makes this car even more amazing is the fact that this car, being over 25 years old, is completely exempt from Ohio's stupid emissions tests. Now, if you live here in Ohio, you will know just how stupid Ohio's emissions tests are, because we have 88 counties here, but only 7 require the test. And I unfortunately live in a county that requires the test. But if you have a car that's 25 years old or older, it is completely exempt, no testing required. Unlike that thing. And what's even more stupid, though, is let's say, for example, if this car was young enough to need the Ohio's emissions testing, they do it once every other year, and if you fail, you have to spend up to $200 minimum just to get your car a little bit of a waiver, just to say, hey, you showed effort. But with this, I don't have to worry about it ever again. Now, I might be a bit biased when I say this, but I do think older cars have a reputation of being substantially more reliable. Granted, the 2016 Jeep Compass has all these computers and all that stuff, but if I were to compare it to, let's say, a modern day car of today, let's say a 2025 Honda Accord, I think this car is substantially more reliable because there's far less to go wrong. I don't have anti-lock brakes in this car, I don't have four-wheel disc brakes, I don't have traction control, I don't have electric power steering, I don't have lane keep assist, or any of that nonsense that takes away the fun and pleasure of owning and keeping an older car like this on the road. I think, generally speaking, this car, being 28 years old, will last a lot more mileage than that 2016 Jeep Compass. Bear in mind, my grandfather has had that Jeep Compass now for about 4 to 5 years. And what has he done to that car during that time? He's replaced the tires once, he's had an alignment done 3 times, and make things even more scary is that Jeep, being less than 10 years old, is starting to rust already. Meanwhile, this 28-year-old plastic car doesn't rust at all. I think this car, generally speaking, despite being a small 1990s economy car, is built substantially better than that Jeep Compass any day of the week. Now, if you were to say down in the comments section, that owning and driving a 28-year-old car every day is not a reliable, let alone a decent way of providing transportation. You'd be quite wrong, because I bought this car back in October and it only had 54,000 original miles on it. Now here we are less than 6 months later and it has just over 64,000 miles. I have driven this car to Indiana twice in a week. I've driven to Washington, D.C. I've driven it to Kentucky. I've driven it to Virginia twice. And it has been an absolute little trooper, and I cannot wait to take this thing on my 2,500 plus mile road trip that I have planned from November 7th up until the 14th. So it is going to be one epic adventure, and I hope to God this little car survives the entire trip. But that being said though, I might have to replace her alternator here soon, so I'm hoping the alternator itself lasts until I come back from Indiana again in May. And as far as reliability goes, it has been quite fantastic on this little car. The only thing I've done to it, which didn't really need done, was I replaced the hubcaps, I replaced the spark plug wires, and the car's been pretty much fine. But the only thing mechanical I had to do to this car was fix the exhaust, which split within a week after I bought this car, and then of course change the spark plugs and fix the brakes. But all in all, this car's been fairly reliable, given the fact that this car has been on the road for the most part of 3 decades. Shoot, my mother was 18 when this car was new. If that doesn't say a lot, I don't know what does. So anyways, viewers, that concludes this quick video on why I prefer to drive older cars like this Saturn every day. If you liked it, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more content from McRoy's Motors, and I will have more videos coming along soon. Take care, everybody.